Art is useless. Well, so wrote Oscar Wilde in this letter to a fan who'd seen a picture of Dorian Gray. Anyway, Oscar Wilde wrote a lot of things, usually to provoke. In this letter, he calls art sterile, and that the only use it may offer is accidental. But then he goes on to say, the subject is a long one. Yes, it is a long one. Oh, before we start, Claire, Jack and Alex did ask me to introduce the talk with a picture of myself to sort of personalise it. I just hate being photographed, but I do appear in the talk in 2 places, and I've made it a little bit easier for you to see me, so see if you can spot me. I've always been a fairly politically minded person, though very much of a small p and not particularly party political, just aware of the world that's around. And as my art practice is just a mode of communicating how I see and consider that world around myself, then this is reflected in the work that I make. My background is in architecture, and my interest in built environment means that this is often articulated looking at the politics of place and our collective history in place, such as this project, Pedestrianisation, which highlighted historical moments of protest and collective action, a rave, cricket matches, migrants moving into the city, and an arms trade protest, and how they turned a single artery road in London over history into a space of human scale and activity. Or with this work, With Every Action Architecture Changes, which extrapolated the small architectural observation that some windows in the Strand venue were missing their original lead work, and I found out the reason was a 1996 IRA bus bomb, and then through that considered the implications of how states extracted themselves or tried to extract themselves from colonial rule. In my previous life, before concentrating on my art practice and also moving to JW3 to work in cultural programming, I worked in conservation architecture. I got to work on some great buildings, important monuments of our collective history, and it gave me a grounding of thinking about the past and how we conserve or remember it, and how we as a people can affect it in both monumental and subtle ways. So this hugely informs my art practice, and one can't consider our past, present or future, and how that is manifested through the physical way we change our world, without politics being an important component, with a big P or little p, but it's always there. So when I heard about the Garden Bridge, it triggered so many of my ongoing concerns in my art practice, the way I see the world, and how I think about things. I love this view. I don't love everything in it, but as a whole it's unique and an important part of London's heritage, as any single piece of architecture is. A canvas evolving over time, in which St Paul's Cathedral sits as a constant within a shifting landscape reflecting evolving aesthetics, engineering, politics, public history, and the story of London across this sweeping bend in the National River. This is the Garden Bridge, presented in these drone view CGI renders as some mythical bucolic landscape transplanted into the heart of the city. It isn't. I don't have the time here to explain the huge number of environmental, financial, democratic, ethical, architectural, transport and political reasons why this project is a total disaster, but it is, deeply. It was invented by this person, an actor called Joanna Lumley, who just happened to know the former mayor, Boris Johnson, since he was 4 years old, and somehow managed to push through her personal project with no scrutiny, protocol, democratic procedure or financial oversight. But her personal dream has turned into a widely mediated public nightmare, as people are rightly criticising the nepotism it represents, and slowly details emerge about rather murky processes within its development and design. My initial personal anger at the project was raised by the damage to our collective history, which triggered my inner conservation architect. What is one of the world's finest urban panoramas would be compromised forever. In effect, it would be privatised. A public, evolving view which is free, open 24/7, and has been enjoyed by pedestrians, cyclists and passengers for 200 years would be lost to a private development which was not proposed in response to any evidence, transport or urban study. But in brief, the issues are way more than just heritage damage. The Garden Bridge truly is a symbol of an awful lot of what is wrong with the neoliberal politics and systems from which it was born. Initially costed at 60 million, it's currently set to cost a minimum of 185 million, of which 60 million is public money. The public purse would be liable also for £3.5 million a year in perpetuity for maintenance. The procurement process was totally rotten, and new evidence is coming out weekly raising serious allegations of those involved. It has no transport function, They state that it's worth a £185 million investment because it will save on average 20 seconds on a commute for anybody walking from Waterloo Station into the city. And it's a private development with no legal right of way, and it represents the growing privatisation of the city with associated strict rules, regulations and private security. It will be closed overnight, 12 times a year for private corporate events, and there's a possibility it may need reduced opening hours in the future or time charge ticketing. All the trees you see in this image will be removed, and this enjoyed, unprogrammed local park, which is an asset of community value, will be concreted over. The commercial unit in its place will have on its roof a Disney-style queue system for 2,500 people. It's this pretense of environmental good which is in fact greenwash Trojan horse. It's a deeply ecologically damaging development opposed by the RSPB, London Wildlife Trust, London beekeepers and more. But it does have 10 million sponsorship from international mining conglomerate and child labour employers Glencore. It's a thin veneer of urban parsley to cover up 15,000 tonnes of concrete. The CO2 from this reckless, arrogant imposition will never be recovered. The actual garden bridge never had a design competition or any design process. It was simply pushed through a back door by Joanna Lumley and Thomas Heatherwick, a back door which Boris Johnson sort of left deliberately open. So I set up a design competition, a free and open to all competition. It wasn't looking for sensible, rational, utopian solutions, though. Instead, I wanted to show the absurdity and damage of the garden bridge by inviting people to design an alternative project for the same site to highlight the serious issues the development raises. I was looking for dystopia. There were certain criteria matching those of the garden bridge entrance should strive to fulfill. It had to remove the local park and trees. It had to block protected views. It had to have the pretense of greening but be ecologically damaging. It had to waste public money. I expected some local blog to pick up on it, or for it to be a little bit fun as an artistic act. But it got picked up by press and struck a chord with people. And entries began to come in, not just from London, but as far afield as Japan, the US, Russia and Africa, from architects, students, school children, angry citizens. They came in as hand drawings, montages, computer renders, sketches and detailed architectural drawings. These ideas and drawings were fun and satire, but they were also profound manifestations of people realising and protesting the deep issues the garden bridge represented. People could actively protest and have fun at the same time, be creative and make a statement, be sarcastic and active, and through it learn and think about the issues at stake, the issues of democracy, environmental improvement, privatisation, public finance and so on. These things are not always accessible or inviting to think about when solely considered through the lens of news and traditional reporting or protest. But by interweaving the activism within an art or participatory context, it invites whole new audiences and demographics to think about the issues. And because it was a predominantly visual project, it generated press and coverage that a more traditional protest may not have. It was covered in the national UK press, sector journalism, and even had a great slideshow in Italy's La Repubblica. I was here on this anti-war protest with 1 million others in London, 36 million globally. Nothing changed. This kind of physical, placard, visible protest is important and powerful. But in a world of interconnectedness, new media, new modes of communication, those who want change need to adapt. This tallies with what Claire Foulkes, former Number 10 speechwriter, said. In our first party conference in government, I remember being in a hotel room 20 stories up, working with the Prime Minister, then looking down at the protest below. Fluorescent yellow police ants. Lots of protesters, their chants unheard in our sealed-up, air-conditioned hush, and thinking, poor things, what a waste of time, no one's listening. The protest is so banal it has become backdrop. Claire Foulkes is now a trustee of the Garden Bridge, so I hope she's happy to see this protest and all the action against her project. The Cuban political artist Tania Bruguera once said about her work, I wanted to find other models to the existing activist slogans and actions to create protest. It's my aim to constantly remind myself of this, that as an artist, the political intervention should be artistic in nature, creative, and offering an angle or method not already covered by those with more traditional and vital methods. But I say this because it's rarely easy, especially with an ongoing, evolving campaign such as that against the Garden Bridge, in which new developments have been almost weekly for 2 years. It's extremely hard in such circumstances to remain proactive and interventionist and not be drawn to reactive conventional protesting. I have, and while I try to find the time and creative space to take a step back, where possible, and make the artistic act, it's incredibly hard when in the middle of an ongoing developing campaign. I had to set up a new website, A Bridge Too Far, to communicate more widely the issues, because the initial website was purely for the competition and didn't have the capacity to communicate such things. And it should be said that most acts of activism are not seen. They involve long emails, researching legalese and planning documents, or carrying out lots of background reading, trying to join up dots not yet joined up, contacting journalists and helping politicians. But where possible, it really helps to be creative and take the sideways attack. Creative responses can open up to media coverage that would likely not otherwise happen. So, for instance, when the Garden Bridge Trust, not known for successful community outreach, largely because the only community they're working for are a few extremely wealthy private businesses and individuals, set up an online hashtag-enabled photo competition, they only got a couple of actual entries, and they weren't even from England. However, quite a few people did enter. These are some. There were a lot more, not all of them as polite as these ones, and unexpectedly, things like this can lead to more coverage, and through it, wider knowledge of the concerns. Because artists have the ability to understand different modes of communication, ways of spreading, ways of interrogating, ways of articulating that invariably the organisations or systems that are under scrutiny do not have due to older structures, lack of movement, and lack of popular support. The winner here, by the way, was from the USA, and shortly apologised after entering, after they found out the truth about what the Garden Bridge really represented. We did some guerrilla gardening. I planted an apple tree on the land which would be concreted over, a gentle offering to give apples to the future generations in hopefully the site where the Garden Bridge was never built. Unfortunately, a few days later, the local council dug it up and it's not there anymore. And when Time Out recently made a cover to look like the scientific table, they featured the Garden Bridge as number 56, TBC. I asked people online to make up their own suggestions of what TBC might stand for. Then, the following week, Time Out picked up on it, and they printed it in their paper. But politics and activism really can mix with art. Not every artist has to be political or an activist, not every artist wants to be. But for those that do, for those that are angry or interested in the political world around them, it mixes so easily. Just look, a year ago, Assemble won the Turner Prize, a group of young architects working with communities for social change. Go online, you'll see the artist taxi driver ranting and raving in his YouTube videos. You've got Jeremy Deller and his reenactment of the Battle of Orgreave, bringing people and history back together. Bob and Roberta Smith make placards and statements and protest for things which are changing in society. Just last week, I saw E15, a young theatre group who made a play about Lambeth social housing issues. Or you've got artists in the institution like Carey Young who are talking about the politics and financial systems which surround everything. Because artists are not aligned to a political system or ideology, they don't have to answer to a boss, an owner or proprietor. They have creative and intelligent modes of communication. They can be quick to respond and flexible in approach, and they can exist between the various systems and sectors. All of these are powerful and useful tools that artists have at their disposal. But, as Tanya Bruguera says, you cannot make political art unless there's a need for it. It can't be faked. You have to be driven to fight against something. You have to see something going on in the world which raises your anger. You have to want to make your work useful and fight against something. And that's what I've been trying to do.